Okay, let's take up with the last of chapter 11 and talk about the last few words on homework. Your book gives the past variables with regard to homework assignments to prioritize what needs to be done most at home, what adapt the materials that are needed, give systematic instruction and systematic assessment. So another acronym, and one that I really like a little bit better. There are a couple of acronyms in this chapter that I think are important and that are worth your taking a look at, and one is this project acronym for assignment completion. This really follows on the heels of our discussion last week with using a peg word and keyword and different strategies to help children remember things. But this assignment completion strategy, I think, can be helpful for two reasons. First of all, kids with low achievement issues almost always have problems with task completion. You know, they don't work quickly, they're not motivated, they tend to engage in a great deal of task avoidance. And so if you can come up with an acronym for them to use as a reminder, then you may be able to make a component build a component of fun into task completion. And in that sense, I think it's important. But the project acronym could be, you know, a reminder on a bulletin board or a classroom to make sure that they have all the forms that they need, to record and ask what their assignment is, to organize it, to get busy on it in a hurry, to engage in it, not be off task, to check the work and turn it in. I can't tell you how many mistakes these kids make by not checking their work and by not turning their work in. We have kids, and oftentimes this is a reoccurrent behavior and a reoccurrent problem that some kids have. They do their homework, but for some reason they don't bring it back to school or they don't turn it in, which of course nets them the same as not having done it at all, except that they may have learned some amount from having actually executed the task. But make sure that you are preparing them to check their work and have a strategy and a place and a sign, you know, a checkout sheet for them for turning their assignments in. Oral presentations are often a problem for children who are low achievers as well. And so your book devotes quite a bit of attention to promoting listening skills and making students efficient listeners. Oftentimes I think low achievers have difficulty listening effectively because they, for one thing, they can't follow the rapid pace of the presentation. I mean, things are moving a little too fast for them. You may remember being in a class where things were just going too fast. You wanted everything to slow down. When they start talking about, to me, the technologist starts talking to me about my computer, I want to scream, slow down, I don't get it. I mean, I'm a little technology challenged anyway. And so I think he's saying, oh, you click here and you click there and you click there and then you turn over to this page and pull down this menu. And of course, I'm still on the click here. I don't even remember where to go from the very first menu. So we need to remember that sometimes children who are having difficulties catching on quickly have difficulties in this area of keeping up with oral presentations. And one of the things you can do to enhance their ability to attend is to let them know what they're listening for. Define the purpose. Why are you listening? Why are they listening to this presentation? What is it that you want them to get out of it? And then once they know what they're supposed to listen for, then verify that they have the requisite skills. Can they hear the speaker? If this is a child with a hearing disability or a child at the back of the room, even with normal hearing, is he positioned so that he can hear? Because if he can't hear, listening becomes increasingly more complex because you're struggling to understand as well as to hear. So if a child has an attentional problem, make certain that you have got this child's attention in your crosshairs before you begin the presentation, or he will be behind from the very beginning. Determine if the student can understand the speaker. We talked last week about how much more effortful it is to listen to people who don't speak your dialect of language. So determine what the relative difficulty might be in having the student understand the speaker. Judge whether the student can recognize and select the important points from the lecture or presentation. If not, you may want to paraphrase these for the student or present them in written form for that student to study at a later time. Is this student an astute observer of nonverbal cues? Oftentimes students aren't. They don't really understand nonverbal cues. We know that their social skills are deficient and they may not intuit some of the things we want them to from the nonverbal aspects of what a communicator is trying to communicate. You may need to model and demonstrate the use of key words and phrases, particularly if these are ESL students. They may not have the vocabulary that contains the key words that are essential for understanding a presentation. Have them identify any important phrases or paraphrase for you the important part, so you know by listening to them that they've heard and understood the relevant parts of a presentation. And give them modeling and instruction in listening and nonverbal cues and how to highlight important information. You can have them do this by acting out with their neighbors what they heard during the presentation. Give them cards with key points or cue cards or key words on there. Usually when you're teaching, you will stay in the same grade level for several years, and you can amass a quantity of these things that are there for you, that are easy to reach in your filing cabinet and pull out when you get to this chapter or this lesson or this presentation the next year, so that you have the key points detailed, the key words identified and taught as vocabulary for the kids. Make sure that if you're teaching concepts, the topics you choose are interesting and motivating. We've talked in the past about the motivational elements of lessons and the importance of constructivism and using relevant and interesting topics to teach constructs that can be taught in any way. Advanced organizers are important. Now, we're going to learn to do a procedure today. You're going to want to follow each of the steps. There are going to be 6 steps in this procedure so that they know what they're going to hear. Give them questions to help them figure out the answers. Problem-solving strategies. We know in problem-solving strategies and hands-on activities always increase the probability that learning is going to occur. For the same reason, you don't forget it when you stand there and follow those directions with that peanut butter yourself. Ask the students to relate to the presentation by asking them more questions from their knowledge. Has this ever happened to you? Can you remember a time? Have you ever seen somebody like this before? If it's an animal or a cat or some sort of object in the presentation, identify this in their backgrounds. Along with key points, you may want to provide outlines and study guides to students. We're going to talk in a minute about note-taking, but many of them are not good note-takers. And if the purpose of them taking notes is that they have the information to learn later, then maybe an outline providing them with the notes or the outline beforehand is a good idea. I do that for you in here. I don't think it's important that you write all this stuff down. And you can see how disconcerting it was when the information that you had printed wasn't identical to the information that I had when I changed some of the the points in my presentation. You didn't like that. You wanted it to be just the same. So you've learned to depend on this. Well, I think that's important. I don't think you have to be able to write it all down. I'd much rather you print it so you can spend your time really listening and trying to understand what I have to say than going through this motion of writing all this stuff down. So you can do these kinds of things for your students if the act of note-taking itself isn't something you're trying to teach them. Then it may be sufficient for them to have an outline or key points or whatever it is that they need to know. It may be important for you to pique interest by having them listen for missing information and pick out things. You may be able to keep their interest this way. You may have more luck keeping your students engaged for longer periods of time if you do part of the presentation now, take a break, and do part of it later. If you speak in a louder voice so you're easy to hear, and you modulate your presentation so you're easy to listen to. You may want to record if you don't have the ability to provide them with the major points or an outline in advance. You may want to provide the major points on the blackboard as you're going along so that you can help them know what needs to be written down and what you're going to hold accountable for. I've finally learned that, you know, I'll tell you, this may be somewhat discouraging to you, I don't know, but even after all of these years that I've taught, I still think I can make it better. So the reason that I work on my overheads, you know, my lecture transparencies before classes, I think I can provide more information that will help you when it comes time for the test. So you will find yourself hopefully embellishing what you do each year. When you do it, you'll get better and better at it. And I don't know that if I'm a role model that you'll ever get good enough. I mean, I think it's our inclination as teachers to try to keep getting better and better and present our information in a way that more and more students will find it easier and easier and easier to learn. And certainly I do that. I try to look at your tests and see the things that you've missed and try to figure out ways that I can provide the information to you in a concise and more effective format so you'll learn it. And it's important for you to do these things. Learning ought to be as easy as possible. I do think there's something to the no pain, no gain. I mean, I do think it's effortful for us to learn things sometimes, but I think the extent to which we can make learning painless, the better it is. I mean, and the more fun we can make it, the better it is. The more interesting, the better it is. So if you can help by writing the major points out for them and providing these for them, go ahead and do it. And adjust your lectures accordingly and plan for problems, and then anticipate that you're going to have problems you didn't plan for. Particularly, don't get discouraged. Kim and I were talking on the way over here about this wonderful Quest 2 student that I had last semester. She was in this class one time when we were taping it, and very chatty and asked lots of questions, and so I got to know her very well. Joe, scared to death, you know, she wasn't going to make an A. And she was a little bit older than some of the undergraduate students that we have, and she went to Quest 2 and she taught her first lesson, and it was terrible. It was a big flop. It was awful. Now, she's going to be a wonderful teacher, but her first lesson, I'm telling you, it sagged. I felt sorry for her. I felt bad for her. Her first lesson was bad, but she's going to be a wonderful teacher. But you can plan for problems, but you're going to have a lot of problems you didn't plan for. I think she had planned for the last 3 or 4 years when she was taking on campus courses. She had planned to be the most wonderful teacher ever, and I know that she will be. But of course, she had a lot of problems that first lesson that she didn't plan for. So you'll have a lot of if you plan for problems, you're likely to encounter some, but no matter how well you plan and anticipate and try to be prepared, you're going to have some problems that you didn't plan for. So you need to be prepared for that as well, and don't get discouraged by it, because you'll get it. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier was note-taking, and note-taking is an important skill for students to learn for several reasons. Because first of all, there's just not going to be the necessary props there always for them. They're going to need to have strategies for learning what they need to know, because they're not going to always have teachers who will plan that for them. And we have some good empirical evidence on note-taking and how to increase the effectiveness of note-taking, and also how high-achieving students compare with lower-achieving students. We used to have a chairman of the Ed Psych department who was a fellow named Norm Kagan, and he was really a wonderful counseling psychologist and internationally renowned. Everybody in the world knew who he was. And he had a strategy for counseling that was called interpersonal process recall. And what he did with interpersonal process recall is that he would videotape two people in a counseling session. One of the people would be the counseling psychologist, and one of the people would be the client. And they would have a therapy session together, and then he would play the videotape for the counselor and play the videotape for the client. And guess what? They weren't thinking, their perceptions of this experience were very, very different. So he devised a strategy for training counselors to be more astute at observing and interpreting the nonverbal communications of their clients, so that they were more efficient and accurate listeners, that they were more on the same page with their clients, if you will. And then this proved so effective in counseling that he began to use this strategy with doctors to make doctors better listeners with patients. He also began to use this technique with teachers and students to make students more effective interpreters of their teachers. And what he found when he debriefed high-achieving students and low-achieving students, he found that high-achieving students were very efficient at understanding and intuiting what their teachers wanted them to learn. The students who were high-achieving students could look at the teacher and say, "Ooh, I knew it was important to write that down." When she puts down her chalk and turns around and looks at the class, you always need to write that down, because that's going to be one of the things on the test. Or, well, I knew to write that down because she started talking real loud. When she wants you to remember something, she always says it real loud. I was observing in a bilingual classroom here a couple of years ago, a first grade, gifted first grade bilingual class. And it was amusing to watch the teacher, because she'd speak in Spanish until something was very important. And then she'd tell the students in English, and I thought it was so amusing. I thought, I wonder if these little kids have figured out that when it's really important, they're supposed to hear it in English. And then I thought, I wonder what the implication is of telling the children who are primarily Spanish speakers the most important things in English. I expect most of the youngsters understood a very high percentage of what she said in English, but I noted that consistently when she wanted them really to listen, she told them in English. Maybe she has learned, maybe she didn't realize that, but she's learned they listen harder if she speaks in English. I don't know, but it was a dynamic I observed in this room. But what Kagan discovered is that high achievers are very astute at observing their teacher and intuiting what is important and what they should write down in their notes. Low achieving students, on the other hand, either try to write it all down and therefore have no way of disaggregating what might be the most important parts to include, or they just give up and don't write anything down at all. So teaching note-taking can be a very important skill for use with youngsters who are low achieving. The first step in this process is to define the purpose of note-taking. And we want to, of course, require students to take notes because it allows them to process greater quantities of information that is presented orally, and it can be reflected on at a later time for review and learning. We also know that students' abilities to take notes is influenced to a certain degree by how efficient they are at listening, how efficient they are at handwriting, and how efficient they are at summarizing main ideas. So when you work with students in note-taking, make sure that the students are prepared before you begin. They have to have the right type of paper, and they have to have the right type pencil or pen already in place before the presentation begins. Learning to write effective short summaries is an important part. They don't have time to write lengthy summaries of things. So the skill of disaggregating the essential points and summarizing them efficiently is very important. And you can show students how to do this with examples of good summaries versus those that aren't as good. The major ideas may be recorded in the student's own words or in words that include the keywords that are in the presentation. The student may need to ask questions for clarification. Encourage them to do so. Often if you move on before the student understands what you said, that point is lost forever. Students cannot write down every single word you say. They're not fast enough or efficient enough, so they have to learn to make efficient abbreviations. They can reduce their writing time and increase their speed by abbreviating many of the important words. They may need to be taught a specific format depending on the subject area. They may need you may want to tell them a format. Number your main points. We're going to have 6 main points in this lesson. Speed and accuracy is important. If they make mistakes, they may need to draw a line through. You don't have time to erase and perfect when you're taking notes. You need to just get the basic points down. If you make a mistake or write a word wrong, cross through it and write another word. Once you've taken notes, they're seldom an end in and of themselves. They have to be used for studying. So the skill of studying using the notes you've taken is also something that needs to be learned. They've got to do something with the notes, though I do think that often the act of writing things down actually helps me learn it some. I do think that is an important part. For example, if I make a grocery list, even if I leave the list at home, I will learn more on that list than if I had not written it to start with. The worst thing for me about going to the grocery store is not even having thought of what I need. When I say, oh, I need a whole bunch of things, I better stop at the store. I end up with baskets of all the baskets full of all things, and none of which I needed, and I get home and I don't have dishwashing detergent and toilet paper, the 2 most important things that I can think of. Besides coffee. I have a hard time getting up without coffee, but certainly making lists help me. If I get to the store with the list, that's good, but even if I don't, sometimes I remember more of the things that the act of focusing my thoughts and actually writing it down seems to enhance my memory to a certain degree. Your book gives the LINK strategy, which stands for teaching students to listen, to identify key points or notes, key words, and stack the information in outline form under your subtopics. I think children who are low achievers will have a great deal of difficulty outlining if you go along, if you don't give them the key points to start with. They need to know when you arrive at a key point that it's another Roman numeral here. They'll never or unless your outline shows this, they'll never figure it out on their own. Another acronym provided in the book is the AWARE strategy. Interestingly enough, this may help you in your studying because the AWARE strategy was actually developed for college students with learning disabilities and used as part of a preparation program to help them in post-secondary education. But the college students were taught in their classes to arrange to take notes, to write quickly, to apply cues for learning whenever possible, to review the notes, and to edit them when they get home, so that while it's still fresh on your mind, edit your notes to see if you've left out essential elements and fill in the skeleton that might have things missing. Now, your book also talks about 3R strategies. The first one I think is okay. I mean, I can't remember 5 R's. That's too many R's for me. But the 3R strategy is reviewing the previous material before class, reading the materials, and relating the topic to other information that you know. And I do think that enhances learning. Yeah, I really do think it enhances learning in classes that are difficult for adults. I think it's important to review what we talked about last time and read in advance what we're going to talk about this time and try to relate it to information that you already know in your past. I do think that that makes college students more efficient learners. Some students have lots and lots of difficulty with note-taking, and with these students you may need to help them devise a format to use in your class on a daily basis. They may need to be taught to write on every other line, so if they need to go back and edit and fill in, or write on one side of the paper so they can edit their notes on the other side of the paper. They may need to date the entries so that they can go back and get more information from you when they sit down and study in advance. If they come across things in their notes that they don't know and they don't understand, they can ask you for clarification on the next day. If they are missing information, they can skip lines. It may be important for them to use a tape recorder. They may be better auditory learners than they are at reading and writing. They may need a peer assistant to help take notes, or they may be able to share notes with the peer assistant. I don't know of anything really, since we don't have secretaries who take shorthand anymore. I don't really know of any vocation that really depends on your ability to take notes. So taking notes is sort of a school skill that helps us learn the things we need to know. And I think when we get into other post-secondary job-related things, I mean, I don't learn much from taking notes anymore. You know, if I want to learn something about my computer, I go to a book and read it, or I listen to the video professor. I mean, I don't go to a seminar and take notes on how to use my word processor. So I think that note-taking is a school skill. So if kids are very, very bad at it, if they want to tape a lecture, if it helps to use somebody else's notes, I don't have a problem with it. Your book also talks about library skills. Often things like term papers are overwhelming to students who are really low achievers. With library skills, teachers may need to provide maps of the interior of the library so students know where to go to locate the materials that they need. They maybe need to be introduced to the reference librarian, so when they're in the library, there's someone there who can help them. There may be specialized training for students with disabilities if they have visual problems or if they have reading problems to help them. But in any event, they need to learn to use tools of the library like reference books, like the indices that are available to identify for them information that they need. Computerized card catalog searches now. Computerized searches of encyclopedias, how to use search engines for the World Wide Web. Some of them may be better at it than you are by now, but if they don't know how to disaggregate information this way, they need to. Also, direct instruction on how to write a research paper is helpful. The very first step in this process was delineated by a man named Gall several years ago, and that was the steps that are involved in defining a writing task. Kids with disabilities, kids who are low achievers, have a great deal of trouble biting off something as big as a term paper or a unit of study. These things that are just result in massive amounts of information are often difficult for them. So start with defining the task. What is the purpose of the writing? Who is the audience directed toward? What is the format going to be? What is the length and scope of the paper? When is the paper due? And if kids have difficulty with this, start with a letter. You can have a writing task. You don't have to start with a term paper. Start with a letter. Kids will love to write a letter to a sports figure or to somebody that they admire, or they have a pen pal or whatever. And then you can move to a more complex production like a report or a project or a term paper, in which they select a topic and develop a writing plan and complete with an outline and brainstorming ideas and collecting information and then organizing the information. I do believe that writing a term paper was one of the most valuable things that I learned in high school for me. Now, everybody in life doesn't write for a living, but I have been in a profession where I had to basically write for a living, and I still do many of those same things. I don't necessarily write note cards like I did when I went to the library, in high school. But what I do is collect lit reviews, and I put them in an envelope. And one of the things I do is I never write a documented sentence in a paper without adding it to the reference list at that minute, because I have spent hours going back looking for a reference that I thought, oh, I'll remember where this is, and I'm in a hurry, so I would type on. It doesn't work. I stop that minute and add it into the reference list. And lots of these skills have been good for me. Everybody won't use writing skills. I mean, I can't say that about algebra. I've never executed an algebraic equation, I don't think, except when my kids had to learn it. But I have about term papers. Yes, ma'am.
I use the index card method when I'm writing my research papers, and it allows me to go back and put in order according to how I want it to be read, and it allows me to throw out certain index cards that I don't want to use anymore. So.
I used to do that too when I generated papers by hand, but now I cut and paste on my computer. But I do it a lot. I mean, I don't know if I do it the same way, but what I do is I get my papers, my lit reviews down from other articles, and I stack them in the order they're going to go, and I put them in a folder. I have several folders on topics that I write about a lot, on teacher assessment and professional development schools and things that I write a lot, and I keep them in a folder, and I think, I just did it the other day. I thought, I think that is in the teacher assessment folder, and I got in there and found it. Sure enough, I found the reference I was looking for. I'd finished this manuscript, but I needed to go back and I thought, I know where there's a reference. I have this reference, but nothing is more frustrating than getting something out of a book or off the internet and you think you'll never forget it. And of course the phone rings, and then the day's over, and then the week passes, and you go back to it and you don't have a clue. And you can spend 2 or 3 days. I've literally spent 2 or 3 days looking for something that would have taken me less than 60 minutes to write down. But
the hardest part of the research paper is
the organization.
The organization and the works cited.
And making certain that you have all that. And that is a skill that is so, so difficult for youngsters who are low achievers. But in any event, once they get down to the draft paper, many kids think they're through. Many college students think they're through too, by the way. They do the rough draft and they think, oops, I'm going to turn this in. And of course, you, with a very short investment of time and energy, you can really improve the quality of your submissions with a revise and rewrite. Sometimes I'm horrified when I go back and read something that I wrote last week. You know, it sounded so good to me last week, and once I sat on it for a week and went back, the minute you write something, for one thing, you already know what it says. You know what it says. So you read it back, you say, oh yeah, it says that. You know what you were trying to say, so you think you said it. And when you go back and reread it, you think you said that. But let it sit for a month and then go back and reread it, and guess what? I said, oh my God, this is awful. What did I mean by that? And then you can clarify your writing and really perfect it. So I never send anything out until I have sat on it for quite a while and proofed and edited the final version. I will tell you one piece of advice for college students. Never, if Bill Gates is telling you that your paper has red and green on it, it is wrong. Bill Gates is right. So if Bill Gates is telling you red and green, go back and fix it. Something's wrong. And the other side of that is equally true. Bill Gates sleeps through a lot of mistakes in your paper. You have to proofread it yourself. You can't depend just on him to catch every typo and every grammatical error, because a lot of times when you spell from, F-O-R, it's still a word. When you spell from, F-O-R-M, it's still a word to Bill Gates, but it's not a preposition. So if you're using it for a preposition, you need to correct that typo before you turn it in. So on that little note, I'll stop and let Kim do your guided practice for today. So, and I'll close this.
ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Your guided practice, I'll get to your guided practice in a moment. I wanted to make a comment about the assignments I just finished grading on the pit crew. Remember Jackie and the little video we watched about Jackie and the pit crew? Just one thing that struck me that everyone who turned in that assignment said about the criteria for selecting students for Jamal was actually the student we used in the example. For his pit crew, something that almost everybody, there were 2 or 3 exceptions, said a criteria for selecting students for that pit crew, they would choose smart kids, they would choose the best students, they would choose the obedient students, they would choose the most well-behaved students for that pit crew. Anyone have any idea why that kind of struck me as a student, as a teacher who has taught students with disabilities for so long? Any idea why I kind of like, a couple of them, in fact, I even wrote in the comments, then I got tired of doing that, and I thought, oh, I'll just mention something in class. Why only the most well-behaved students and the smartest students and the best students to be on that pit crew? What about that student maybe that isn't that well-behaved, gets in trouble? What about that student that maybe isn't that A+ student all the time? Do you think that student might benefit from being on a pit crew for another student? Absolutely. That could be an opportunity for that student to really feel important in that classroom. That could be an opportunity for that student to feel like they're contributing and helping another student who's having difficulties. So excuse me. So I just wanted to bring that up. I think it's really important when we're thinking about having students help other students to not only use the most well-behaved, the most obedient, the A+ students. Use some other students that might benefit from that experience also. So I just wanted to comment on that. And like I said, 2 or 3 people said I would use students who would benefit from it because they might also have trouble in that area. But mostly people said the opposite. For our guided practice today and for your independent practice this week, we are talking about homework. And after hearing what Dr. Goodman thinks about homework as a parent, with 2 students still in school, one in elementary and one in high school, oh boy do I agree. My high school student especially comes home from volleyball practice or track practice or whatever she has that week. Sometimes she doesn't get home till 6 o'clock, eats dinner, you know, spends half an hour relaxing, and still has 3 or 4 hours of homework ahead of her and doesn't get to bed till 11 or 12 at night. So I would have to agree to an extent. My 5th grader doesn't have quite as much, but as Dr. Goodman pointed out, my 5th grader has some trouble in school. And what usually should take what the teacher says, oh, this is just a half hour of homework. Well, it takes her an hour to maybe even 2 hours to accomplish it if she has to do it on her own. So you have to be ever cognizant of exactly what your assignment is and who you're assigning it to, and we're going to talk about that. Homework, important to academic success? Absolutely. Whether you like it or not, it's part of school. In a lot of school districts, they'll say, if you are a 3rd grade teacher, you will assign 45 minutes of what you think will be 45 minutes of homework a night. That is the requirement of your school in your district. Math will be Tuesdays and Thursdays, reading will be Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays. Every district is different, but in most districts, I know all districts that I have worked in, it is the requirement for teachers to assign homework. So whether you think it is important to academic success as far as learning more, it's important to academic success because students will not be successful in public school unless they can complete homework. And Dr. Goodman was correct. A large majority of students who fail classes is because they have a line of zeros where the homework grade should be. They could have gotten hundreds on the tests, did fine in their in-class assignments, but those zeros on that homework, and they fail the class. So it is important to academic success. It does provide additional learning time and strengthen those study and organizational skills if you present it correctly, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Also, it's important, it lets parents know what's going on in your classroom. That's how I know what my kids are working on in school. What is my high school daughter reading? What is my fifth grader learning in science? What are they doing in math? What do I need to work on at home? Okay? So it's almost a line of communication between your students' parents and the classroom. And it lets the teacher know, hopefully, what skills need more practice and more review. I hope all teachers use homework as almost, even if you don't take grades on your homework, use it as an assessment. Oh gosh, you know, I had 5 people handed in this homework assignment. They obviously are having a lot of trouble with this. I obviously need to go back and reteach either the whole class or these students on these skills. So I think homework can be used by the teacher in a very constructive way, as opposed to just grading it and putting a grade in the grade book. You can really tell who's getting what you're teaching and who's not getting it. Okay? Important homework strategies. And some of these Dr. Goodwin went over. Give clear and appropriate assignments. Homework should be an extension of what students have learned in your class. And I know one of the students commented that her daughter comes home with homework and, you know, mom says, well, didn't you work on this in class? No, we've never done it before. And I unfortunately have dealt with that also. In fact, my daughter's brought chemistry homework. Once she gets into chemistry and calculus, I'm in trouble. Chemistry homework the other night, it was a lab. And I said, well, sweetie, didn't you do this in class? She had to write up a lab. She said, no, the teacher didn't know how to do it. We're supposed to figure it out on our own. And I was not going to be a big help. So I called a friend of mine who's a high school science teacher, and she helped us out. So homework should be an extension of what you've taught in class. And that's pretty much common sense, but you'd be surprised how many times that happens, that students come home with homework on material that they have not learned. The next one is make homework accommodations. Make modifications and accommodations to students you know will have trouble with that assignment, whether it's because they have a disability or it's an area that they're weak in school. Make sure you have practices that you know this is how I'm going to accommodate this student, and you'll know which students will need accommodations and adaptations to that homework. The next is teach study skills. Both general and special education students consistently report that homework problems seem to be exacerbated by not knowing how to organize and study. Okay? Many students, particularly students with disabilities, need instruction in how to organize, how to study, and Dr. Goodman went over some of those things in class today. Oh boy, organization is really tough for a lot of kids. And I'm not talking about just kids with disabilities, all kids. And Dr. Goodman is right in that kids that are high achieving, it just kind of comes naturally. They learn it vicariously, they know what they need to do to get to their goal. But a lot of students do not understand that. And those of you who will be elementary school elementary school teachers, do those teachers that come after you a favor and start early teaching those kids how to organize, how to study, how to, you know, go through steps and do things, because the earlier they learn, the more they can carry it on to grades above them. Because once kids get to intermediate schools, those teachers aren't going to hold their hands anymore and say, oh, this is what you need to do and this is what you need to do. So we really, as elementary school teachers, need to prepare those students by teaching them organizational and study skills. Use a homework calendar, and Dr. Goodman talked about that. And on your assignment, I'm going to ask about how you would do a few of these things. Please be specific. Use a homework calendar. Well, yes, fine, but how are you going to use a homework calendar? What's it going to look like? How will the students write things in there? What time of day? How will you check? Okay? How will you make it effective? It's almost back to those learning objectives. Sure, you're going to use a homework calendar, but what does that look like? I want specifics as far as how are you going to do that, so it's an effective tool. You can send home a homework calendar, but that doesn't mean it's going to help anybody. Okay, besides mom's going to get frustrated and look at it and see it's empty and say, well, what was your homework for tonight? I don't know. Believe me, we have a lot of things like that in the evening. So we call somebody, what was the spelling homework? I go through that a lot. And strategy 5, ensure clear home-school communication. Teachers and parents of students with disabilities must communicate clearly and effectively with one another about homework policies, required practices, mutual expectations, student performance on homework, homework completion difficulties, and other homework-related concerns. I used to tell my students who I knew, tell the parents of students who I knew were going to have difficulty with the homework, I would say, this ought to take your student about 30 minutes. If you're going on 45 minutes an hour, stop. Write me a little note saying this is what we worked on, this is the problem the student is having, and just send it back to school. Don't spend 3 hours trying to do 5 multiplication problems. Okay? And then as the teacher, I will determine exactly what the problem is and we'll do some remediation. Okay? That's that open line of communication with your parents. They should know the policies. They shouldn't have to guess. Okay? My daughters have had wonderful teachers and I knew exactly what the homework policy was, what they need to do, the neatness count, what the heading was, everything. And my daughters have had teachers where none of us had any idea because those policies were not set up and encouraged and repeated in the classroom. You do yourself a favor by at the beginning of the year have very clear set policies about homework. Things like, what type of assignments am I going to have? Okay? How am I going to communicate those assignments? As Dr. Goodman talked about, are you going to stop after every class and have them write in their assignment book? Is it on the board? Is it on a bulletin board? How are you going to make sure the students know what's important and what's assigned? Where can the students go for help? Do you have a website? Can they call you? My daughter's 4th grade teacher. Let the students call her between 6 and 7 at night if they had a question about the homework. If that's what you want to set up for yourself, you could do something like that. Where can they go for help? A classmate. Okay? How do you collect assignments? Do the kids put it in a folder and put it in a basket? Do you collect them after each class? Kids need to know what to expect. You need to have some kind of procedure. How are you going to grade them? Do the grades go into the grade book? Incentives. Okay? What are we going to give the kids for doing their homework? Sure, you can say, well, they have the inner pleasure of knowing they completed their homework. Well, a lot of times it takes a little bit more than that for a lot of kids. What kind of incentives? Do they just get a reward if they've done it correctly, or do they get a reward if they have done it at all? And those are the policies and procedures you'll need to set up in your classroom. Your first assignment on your guided practice, for each strategy, and I will go back to those in a minute so you can see them, write down one specific policy or practice that you will initiate in your classroom. For example, on the give clear and appropriate assignments, a specific practice might be have students start homework in class to check for understanding. I might say, let's get out that math homework tonight and do the first 3 problems together. So you'll see exactly how I want you to do it. And I want you to put a box around your answer and highlight it. And so when they go home and they sit and do it, oh yeah, I remember what we're supposed to do. We did the first 3 together in class. Okay, so that might be one way that you can give clear and appropriate assignments. Okay, so for each strategy, write down one specific policy or practice that you will initiate in your classroom, whatever grade level you are. Now, if you're a preschool teacher, I know you don't give a lot of homework, so you may have to think elementary. Okay, and let me go back. And I'm going to give you about, 5 minutes to write one policy or procedure down for each strategy that you would implement. And try to be creative. Think a little bit outside the box. You can do it with a classmate, or you can do it alone. I had people pair up just so they could kind of bounce ideas off of each other. Strategy 1, give clear and appropriate assignments. How about we start with this group over here? What's a specific policy or procedure you came up?
Having a homework board up at the front, and the teacher writes specifically, this is your assignment, up at the front. And we also talked about reviewing it at the same time every day before you leave, before you leave the classroom for home. Okay, does everyone have their assignments? Do you have your materials? And just reiterate one more time what's expected.
Very good. It's important, too, to keep those assignments up on the board until they're due. Because 2 days later, when you say, well, don't forget so-and-so's due tomorrow, well, what was it? Well, it's not there anymore. I don't know what it was. And that way it's there until it's actually due. So that's excellent. And just as Dr. Goodman had reviewed, make sure it's in the same place every time. Students know where to find it. You also might want to assign students with disabilities a buddy. Let's go over with so-and-so and write down your assignments together. And that kind of gives them a reminder to write it in their notebook. Excellent. Anyone else have an idea to give clear and appropriate assignments? How about this group right here?
On the actual homework page, it does have the directions written down in your words, but where they can understand it easily.
Yeah, excellent. Make sure that they know what they're supposed to do. That's one of the most frustrating things for kids and parents. I can tell you as a parent, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And don't assume that just because you said it 3 times that they'll go home and 3 hours later know what they're supposed to do. Okay? Especially if they haven't written it down. So it's always a good idea to have the directions right up at the top in easy language, especially if you have students who are low readers or students with disabilities. Absolutely. Any others? We'll see if I had any others. Dr. Goodman mentioned coordinate with other teachers. Maybe you want to give math on Mondays and Wednesdays and reading and spelling on Tuesdays and Thursdays so the kids don't have too much homework. Those were good. Explains assignments clearly. And of course, assign work that the students can do. Establish a set routine in the beginning of the year as far as this goes also. Okay. How about make homework accommodations? How about someone from our back table there? What's something specific you had down there? Use your microphone.
I was thinking maybe that instead of grading on completion or on correctness, to accommodate that they gave their effort onto doing it instead of completion or correctness.
Absolutely, and that goes along with using homework as an assessment of whether your students are understanding what you're teaching. So you see the student put forth effort. He may have failed the homework, but now you know you need to reteach that concept to that student, and he still gets credit for attempting to do the homework. That gets harder as you get into middle school and high school. It's easier to do in elementary school, but that's a good policy. How about one of you all for the number 2, the make homework accommodations?
I think students should be allowed to move at their own pace according to their understanding of the material. Say, for instance, you're working on multiplication facts and some students are still working on their 3s. You assign 3s and 4s and allow those that are moving at a quicker pace to work on their 4s while others are still on their 3s. So.
Very good, very good. And along with math, I'm a believer, and a lot of people will scoff at this, that if you get into intermediate school and high school and a child still does not know the multiplication tables, hand that child a calculator so they can do some more advanced math because they can't remember what 8 times 7 is. They'll never get to some of those advanced math, higher level thinking. That's why we invented calculators. How many of you try to do your checkbook without a calculator? I sure don't. Okay? So I don't, personally, and math teachers I'm sure would don't like that idea. But if you have a student with disabilities that is stopping them from moving on to learning more, I don't see any problem with it. Okay? Some other ones, allow alternative responses. Okay? If a student is supposed to write a 2-page essay and that student has trouble with composing sentences and paragraphs, why not, if the objective of your lesson is to see that they understood the material, why not have them tape record it and bring their tape in for you so they can tell you This is what I understood from the lesson. Is that still fulfilling your objective? Sure. Unless your objective was how to write a 2-page paper, and then it's not. So you have to be clear in your head what the objective was for that lesson. Adjust your evaluation standards. We talked about that. And provide learning tools, calculators, websites, homework hotlines, things like that. Okay, teach study skills. How about this table? One of you all.
We said to just let them know to read directions thoroughly and to make sure that they study in a quiet place, not anywhere where it's noisy, stuff like that.
Excellent, yes. How about over here in the corner?
We put emphasize and model organization skills in the classroom as a teacher.
Yeah. How many times have you walked into a classroom and the teacher seems disorganized and there's things all over the place? Well, how do you expect your students to be organized if the teacher is disorganized? They're following her model. So that is an excellent one. And model for the students how to do the assignment, how to organize the assignment, etc. And that's how they learn. Using a homework calendar. How about if we have one for this? Who haven't I picked on yet? Over here.
You might have just a little calendar to put in a folder that they can take home every day. Like we talked in class today about having planners, but make sure that they, when they get their homework assignment, that they write down what the homework assignment is for the date. And when they take it home, they can have their parents sign it or something to make sure that you know that the parents saw that they got the homework home and you know everything. And then when they come back, you can put a star on every day that they did their homework, and if they do their homework for a whole week, they could get something. If they do their homework for a whole month, they could get something even bigger if you wanted that incentive.
So you have like a reward system built in there, okay? And that makes them accountable at home also. And also makes the parents accountable that they have checked that folder, especially in the lower grades of elementary school. They have checked the folder and they've touched, you know, they've seen the homework, etc. Okay? Let's see if I had any more for that one. You can, any kind of organizing technique or procedure, color-coded things work well for students with ADD, ADHD. They know which colors mean what, things like that. So come up with some real good specific ideas for that one. How about oh, yes, ma'am.
Well, I was thinking that you could probably make a weekly, if not a weekly, a daily one where you could put it on the overhead or the PowerPoint and then write it and have the children write it at the same time that you're writing it. That way you know that they're writing it in there.
Absolutely. And if you get in that habit, you know what? It doesn't take long for the kids to get in that habit of doing that. And before long, you won't even have to tell them. They'll see it on the overhead. They'll write it down. Something I used to do for when I was a resource teacher, the students with learning disabilities, was I would ask the teachers for the homework for the week, and I would type it out on labels. And all the kid had to do was take the label and stick it in their assignment book. And that's something very easy to do that as a teacher you could do. Okay? If you have a student that just can't seem to get things written down, do some labels. They can take it, stick it in their assignment book, it's written down for them. A lot of accommodations you can make. How about ensure clear home-school communication? How about over here? Oh, you didn't get to that? Who got to that one? That was kind of at the end. Okay. Use your microphone, please. Thank you.
Well, I had the parents signing the calendars and the assignments for what the kids have done.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore they know if they've done it or not, and therefore they've signed off, and whether or not they know if they have it or not.
Sure, and that gives the parents an opportunity too to write a note. You know, oh, we worked on this for half an hour, and she's just not getting it. Okay, and hopefully teacher will understand that and know some remediation is in order. Also, sharing information with the teachers regarding the student's strengths and the needs and the necessary accommodation keeps that line of communication open. Also, if you have a student who is having trouble getting homework done, why not send home a list for the parents? This is how you can help your student at home, and I know a lot of teachers already do that with some specific ideas how they can help at home. You know, a lot of parents don't know that maybe that student needs a quiet place to study. Set up a place in your home. Have them set goals for themselves. All those things they can do at home to help with their homework. Okay? We're running out of time, so we'll have to do this next part kind of quick. The last part of your assignment is going to be looking at homework assignments and then making adaptations to those or accommodations to those for students with disabilities. You will have students who will have to adapt the homework assignment. So we're going to look at these very quickly. For example, I'm sorry, I want them. There we go. Consider the following homework assignments. Write down one way that each assignment could be adapted so the objective is fulfilled. But a child with disabilities could still be successful. Always think, what is the objective of this assignment? Is it to learn how to write a two-page paper, or is it to show me that you understood the chapter that we covered today? Okay? Whatever that objective is, you can adapt it and accommodate it to that student. Since we're running out of time, why don't we just have each team do one, and we'll see. There's 6 homework assignments. Why don't you take the first one over here? How could we adapt that? Number 2 here, number 3, number 4, number 5, and back table number 6. And we'll just take 2 minutes. What accommodation could you make for a student with disabilities? Instead of having to study 20 spelling words, which is going to be overwhelming to a student who has disabilities. And I'm not going to, in your assignment, I say exactly what disabilities, but this is just kind of general. What's one accommodation you can make to that assignment that would still fulfill the objective of studying spelling, but won't be quite so overwhelming to the student? If you have any trouble, think like middle school. We did a lab today in science, and you want the students to go home and write down what you did in the lab today to kind of refresh their memory. Well, a student with disabilities, I don't know what I did 4 hours ago. Did you come up with something? Okay. And your adaptations and accommodations don't have to be long and complicated. As a teacher, you have such a short time to do things during the day anyway. It can be something so simple that will help that student who has a disability be successful in their homework and not drive their parent crazy to boot. Okay, why don't we start with number 1 over here. Study 20 spelling words. Every kid in the world has had to take home 20 spelling words to study for homework, right? What about that child that's an overwhelming task to have to do? What are we going to do for that child?
First of all, we thought instead of doing them all in one night, they could be broken up over maybe 4 or 5 nights. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about doing them on a tape recorder instead of the child writing them down. The other thing would be they could maybe work with a buddy, a homework buddy, where they could call each other and work on the words together instead of doing them alone. What else?
The creative writing.
And the other thing was to create instead of actually writing them down, to create where they could actually plan a little skit or a story around the words. Something
Using
a little bit more
words.
creative. Just using the words, and maybe instead of writing them down on paper, they would be telling something to the class, a little story.
All good ideas. Very good accommodations. How about number 2? Read 2 chapters in your novel. This would be more of a middle school. And write a summary of what was read.
Again, I believe in working at your own pace, so even though 2 chapters were assigned, you could accommodate the slower readers by telling them to summarize how many pages they were able to read through, instead of reading pages 1 through 20 and summarizing those. Say, for instance, say they were able to read pages 1 through 15, and then supply the page numbers and the summary on those pages.
Very good. And also an idea for this one is to provide a template. This, where they can just fill in words instead of having to write, okay, this or a short answer type thing, where they're summarizing and having to come up with the answers, but they don't have to write the whole thing. So that's a good idea. Always breaking up the assignments, always a good idea if you can keep up with it as the teacher. Number 3, read chapter 4 in the history book and answer questions 1 through 20 at the end of the chapter. Oh, that's a typical one, isn't it? How about an accommodation for that one?
We thought that we could have somebody tape record the chapter so he could listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Very good, especially if they're low in reading, if they're having trouble with reading. Absolutely. What about answering all 20 questions?
You could do the odd numbers.
That's a good question.
You could do the odd numbers.
Absolutely. Do the even numbers, do the odd numbers. That breaks it up. Do every third, whatever. Okay? Number 4, write up the science lab done in class today. This was that chemistry assignment last week. What are we going to do for that student who can't remember what they did in science today?
All right. Maybe like have some students have note cards with headings on it, like the problem, hypothesis, the actual experiment, and the conclusion. And like as they're actually going through the experiment, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They take their own little notes and their words next to the heading, and then they can take it home and write up a real lab report.
What a great idea! Take notes while you're doing the lab. It's right there. All you have to do is take your note cards home, write it up, and as the teacher, you didn't have to do anything. Okay, that student did it themselves, but that was an accommodation that night they could take those and have a successful assignment. Very good idea. How about complete 20 multiplication problems?
Make sure they have good directions. I mean, it should be pretty good, but just in case. Have a few problems worked out in detail. Like if they're longer problems, they'll probably be shorter problems, but just in case, and so they know, and work them out in front of them.
Have examples. Mm-hmm.
Just have them try their best. They might not complete them all. If they do, they have another night or whatever to finish them. Make sure that they and their parents know helpful hints. Like if they're 9s, you can use your fingers, or if there's 3s, there's a rhyme to do it. And if they are really having trouble, maybe they can use a multiplication table. I know that's kind of cheating, but it depends on how, where they are. So.
Absolutely. Let's see if we can fit our last one in here before our time runs out. Start your biography book report. It's kind of general, isn't it?
Yes. Well, first we said explain what is a biography to the student. Make sure they know that. We also said give examples of biographies. Let them know that it could be short, 2 to 3 paragraphs, and also show them steps in the writing process.
Absolutely. Excellent job.
Let them do a picture biography.
Absolutely.
If they're not good writers, and you think their home is conducive to that they would have pictures, they can do a picture biography.
Do the Living Museum. Remember I told you all about that one? That was a good one. Thanks. Good luck.